Is global warming real? Is climate change irreversible? Why are carbon emissions still rising? Join host Dr. Alberto Troccoli, a global leader in climate science and its application to the energy sector, as he unpacks these pressing issues. Through candid conversations with leading experts, get ready to demystify climate change and explore its many layers. So, let's Climunicate!
Hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of Let's Climunicate. I'm very happy to be here today with my guest, Chris Henggeler from Kachana Station in the West Australia, the Kimberley region. And we'll hear a lot of very interesting stories. I must say I'm very lucky to have bumped into Chris because I've learned so much coming from climate and not knowing much about how regeneration of the land works. Following and listening to Chris, it's a well of knowledge and wisdom. So I look forward to the discussion with you, Chris.
Thank you, Alberto, and hello to your listeners.
Okay, good. So Chris and I also, just to clarify, we have been working together for the past year or two on a paper that was published recently on the rebalancing of regional and remote Australia. We make some reference to that during the interview. And what it entails is basically using a wide range of options from energy to desalination water and regeneration of the land. And this is the topic that we want to discuss. And particularly, Chris has been working on his part of the world. We'll hear more about the land he's been working on and how then we can try to scale up the effort that he and other people like Chris have done in Australia and over the world. Because there's so many of these activities, but they are struggling a little to scale up. So that would be a very interesting point of discussion today. Before we start, though, it's a tradition to ask some quick-fire questions. Chris, if you're ready. So basically, we want to just touch base on a few basic questions, like would you be able to tell me, Chris, how much the global surface temperature has changed in the last 150 years?
Well, the prevailing narrative coming from the science domain seems to be about 1.5 degrees, a little bit over 1 degree.
Excellent. Okay. And would you be able to also tell me how much of this increase is due to man-made greenhouse gases emissions?
I cannot give you the exact answer. I can give you my impression of what I'm hearing is there are estimations that it's 100% human-made. There are other people who are saying, no, there are other factors. I'd be inclined to say that, just from my observation, humans have a great impact on climate, but not necessarily. CO2 may not be the only villain, given the fact that I'm living in a part of the world where arguably it's one of the Kimberley's arguably one of the first places on the planet that experienced human-induced climate change, where this part of the world used to be tropical rainforest before the first humans arrived in Australia. And so long before we started emitting industrial carbon to the air, we've been able to change climate. So I'm sure that humans have a major impact and are having a major impact. The weighting, I think that's where science has to keep on asking.
Excellent. Yes, indeed. I mean, there's obviously large natural cycles, and even the Sahara Desert was once fertile. So not so long ago, apparently. So there's a big changes indeed. But obviously, there's also a great deal of science now that is studying the effects of emissions. So that's good. And the last question is about. The third question is about how would you expect the temperature to change over the next, say, 80 years? Normally, we take 2100 as the target.
Well, as a layperson involved with the grassroots, it's less the temperature change that concerns me. It's unprecedented temperature fluctuations and the more erratic weather, and those aspects of the debate that concern me, because that's what keeps people in business or can cause major havoc. So I certainly wouldn't make any predictions. It's just I'm saying erratic weather patterns and erratic fluctuations, unprecedented fluctuations. That's the sort of stuff that I'm looking at, and I think as we're dealing with high levels of unpredictability here.
Yeah, and that kind of leads on to the final question, which is you may not be aware there's something called tipping points, and these are major parts of the climate that are close to an unstable point, and they may flip over to another state, and that's why they're called tipping points. And there are a number of them, like the permafrost and Siberian region, for example, the Antarctic ice sheets, and this can cause major changes to the climate, sea level, and emissions and so on. Are you aware of this, and how concerned would you be about them?
Once again, I'm not aware from a scientific level, but I've personally seen the recession of glaciers in Switzerland just in my lifetime. And it is definitely, there are trends. There are very well-established trends that if these persist, we will run into tipping points. As to when and how and why and whether there are triggers, all that's once again, it needs more communication and a lot of science.
Very good. So you mentioned Switzerland, and actually, so that actually leads me to the next question, because it's interesting to learn a bit about your background, where you're coming from, because you've been living in Australia for so many years, maybe 40 years or so, but you are originally from, and you went through Switzerland, I guess, I understand. So if you can explain a little bit your journey, that'd be great.
I'm a Swiss Rhodesian Australian. I was born and bred in southern Africa in a little farm in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And I finished my high school in Switzerland, did my national service there. I've still got family in Switzerland, so I know Switzerland reasonably, or certain areas of Switzerland, especially the Alpine area, reasonably intimately. And I came to Australia, sort of worked my way across northern Australia from east to west, and the last 35 years I've been based here in the Kimberley. But still keeping an eye on what's going on, and living in an environment which is sort of considered to be inhospitable. In fact, it's probably the other end of the scala compared to the Swiss Alpine zone, where there's also, once you get above the tree line, things get inhospitable for humans. Over here, it's just a different extreme. And I'm dealing with country that used to support human activity, and that has now no longer supports human activity, and I'm trying to reclaim things. And so my focus is on microclimate. And
So in order to get to the microclimate, it's also interesting to learn your setting. So basically, from Switzerland, you came over to Australia, and you, I guess, flew over some areas and spotted this particular land where you are now sitting, and you bought this land. Can you tell us a bit more about how you come around? What was the situation from a kind of a vegetation point of view at the start, so we can follow a little bit the journey during the conversation?
All right, I'll have to add a bit of context there. So as a young man, I came to Australia looking for a place where I could sustain a family and replace what we lost in Rhodesia, basically, and that's a land-based family business. But not having the money, I had to sort of look at areas that the market wasn't interested in. So it was either something small or something part of or something run down. And I worked my way across the north, and when I came to the Kimberley, I realized first of all, we have a lot of water, or we had a lot of water, reliable water. And good rainy seasons, and a lot of country that wasn't doing much was just burning, and there was just nothing happening on there. So I guess the opportunity came up on this piece of land, a country that had been abandoned by its earlier inhabitants. People had been living here for thousands of years, and then all of a sudden, within a few decades, so gone. And then industry ignored it. So it was a country that had never been managed in the European sense. But there was sunshine, there was water, and there was still a bit of soil. A lot of it was being washed away. The rivers were red and black, full of the soil that got washed away each year. But my understanding as a young man was we had the basic building blocks for building biodiversity. We had sunshine, water, and parent material. What was missing and was disappearing fast was the biology, and what was certainly missing was the management. And naively at the time, I believed that with perseverance and uncommon good sense, I could sort of get somewhere. It's taken a lot longer, but it's been a fascinating journey. And I guess the take-home message is if we learn to work with nature, it's a lot easier than fighting her. And the other thing is, we know, or we believe scientists, many thousands of years ago, this country had very high levels of productivity, and these are still the potential is still reflected over on the east coast and some of the ranges there. So the question is, if we had those high levels of productivity, how did they get there, and how were they maintained? We had these high levels of productivity. What created that productivity? What sustained it over millennia? And are those natural processes that built that natural wealth that humans rely on? And in this case, we've sort of pulled down. Can we rebuild those? And the indications that I'm getting is yes, most of these processes are still in place. As a very prominent regenerative manager furthest to the south of us says, if you want to find out what nature can do, just take your foot off its throat, and she'll show you what she can do. And that's what we're trying to do up here: is take the foot off nature's throat, work with her, and see where the journey takes us, and hopefully enjoy the ride.
If I understand correctly, then you arrived at the time when the soil was not very productive, was like bare soil or not fertile. So you were in this long cycle of nature. Basically, you found this piece of land which needed attention, and we don't know how it got there, because probably went through, like you said, the periods of fertile land. But then when you arrived, and it wasn't, and then you spent a lot of time trying to regenerate that land, and at some point also you bumped into the teachings of Alan Savory. I understand someone regards his teachings as a bit controversial, but you demonstrated that it works. So can you walk us through a little bit briefly your journey there, how you demonstrated that this approach works?
Well, I guess I had a number of unfair advantages. First of all, I was attuned or very sensitized to water security in the areas where I grew up. So I was also sensitized to desertification. And this was prior to finding out about Savory. And the country was desertifying, yet we did have little pockets that were likely oases where there's permanent water, but obviously they were like magnets to all the feral cattle and donkeys at the time. So there was a lot of degradation happening, which I attributed to the behavior of the introduced now feral animals. And in hindsight, they definitely played a role. But there were a lot of things that I didn't understand. But we took away, in our experimental areas, we reduced the herbivores, or at least we changed their behavior, and we got them to behave more like the African animals, so well, like herd animals. They are herd animals. Their behavior had become feral. So you had individuals just looking for selectively getting the best stuff out of the country and literally killing plant after plant, eliminating species after species in direct according to their pastoral desirability. And it is not the way nature worked as I saw it in Africa. So here I am, I say, right, we've got these new Australians here. They're not behaving as they ought to be. Let's get them behaving as they ought to be, which is put them back in a herd so they mulch, evenly fertilise and prune vegetation, and let's see what happens. We also had other new Australians that I'd witnessed in the industry working my way across the north, and that is a whole lot of new deeper-rooted pasture species. So with the blessing of the Ag Department at the time, I found an area where we could agree that without intervention, all the soils would be lost anyway. So I guess I played lotto with a resource which otherwise wouldn't be there very much longer, and brought the locally introduced new Australian pasture species to hold the soils together. And then I changed the behaviour of the feral animals, made them functional as herds, and used them for the mulching, fertilising and pruning to keep those plants healthy. So what I'd done in effect was I'd put an African skin graft onto an Aboriginal wound. Now the question to me was, have I now just initiated a new mining operation? So the initial mining operation failed. We've just mined the top of the surface. We've lost our organic horizons and stuff's washing away. And now the industry brought in deeper-rooted species so we can mine the soils to a greater depth. Have I just created a new mining operation which will fall on a big heap, in 30 years' time or whatever? So by that time it was 97, so I realised I have to go back to school. Just Stockman knowledge alone won't help me here. And that's when I stumbled across Alan Savory and say a few years later, Elaine Ingham. And I think the key, and there's a lot of good people out there. I mean, there's success stories everywhere, and it's just I happen to, it's, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear, and these are the teachers that appeared in my life. So through Alan Savory, I got a better handle on understanding the role of the macro herds, and that allowed me to ask better questions. And through Elaine Ingham's soil food web stuff, I got to understand a better handle of understanding the micro herds, invisible herds underneath the soils. And then much later in the piece, I found out about Fred Provenza, who came around with the animal behaviour. So certainly the three key figures, or the three giants whose shoulders I'm standing on primarily, would be Savory, Ingham and Provenza. But there are a lot of little local idiosyncrasies, and one size never fits all. And then you've got to look at the aspirations of the local communities and the politics and all that. So it's highly complex. But at a basic level, I'm pretty confident in hypothesizing that the fuel that runs our ecosystem is sunshine. We've got 12 hours of that available around us every day. We're wasting most of that. The only way we can get that into our bank accounts is via the photosynthetic process. To enhance the photosynthetic process, we need healthy vegetation. And this is where I'm looking at in savanna landscapes, and that the role of the new megafauna. Can we change the behaviour manage the behaviour of Australia's new megafauna in a way that they actually enhance ecosystem function? In fact, that they replicate what their wild ancestors would have done prior to domestication. And we are on a different continent. However, it seems to still work. And then I think the argument that I'll pose is, if you look at a lung or a kidney or a liver, whether it's an elephant, a kangaroo, or a bison, or a mouse, they are very different in each animal, but their function is the same. And so we look at Australia, the Americas, Africa, we've got different continents. but I suspect that wetland systems would have functioned in a similar manner. Savanna systems would have functioned in similar manners. Wetland systems would have functioned in similar manners. So I'm saying there's an awful lot we can learn. And given the fact that Australia lost most of its large herbivores many thousands of years ago, and humans did an admirable job surviving as they did for thousands of years, but whatever couldn't be biologically processed had to be exhausted to the atmosphere via fire, which left less of that solar fuel coming into the natural economy. And what I'm saying is now is, well, not only have we got more people than ever before, we're also supplying nutrients to another 60 or something, quite a million people offshore. To sustain Australia's nutrient extraction and distribution, we need to look at recharging Australia's productive capacity and getting in more energy. So what excites me is how can we use Australia's new megafauna to enhance ecosystem function? And that's why I say I started off as a student of ecosystem function, and then I remain one. It's going to take a long time.
That's very, very interesting. A lot of information. I mean, it's obviously not particularly easy to follow all the steps, but we get the picture of how you took this land and brought it to a good level of fertile and productive. So the regeneration you're talking about obviously is also very important, as we said at the beginning, for the mitigation purposes, because grassland and vegetation in general is a very good absorber of greenhouse gas emissions like CO2. So having this operation done at the larger scale obviously would have also benefits on mitigation purposes, but also obviously, as you say, the land is regenerated and you get much more production out of it. So also, to put things into context, you are operating on a parcel of land which is a big parcel of land, very large, isolated, but it's like around several hundred kilometers square, or maybe 1,000 kilometers square. Just to give it, you can be more precise, just to give it an idea. But then, how can you make a differentiation from the land which you found, which is unmanaged land, versus the land that is used, for example, for intensive cattle farming, where, as far as I can see, I'm not an expert, most of the time it doesn't look very fertile as a land. So you are, if I understand correctly, sitting somewhere in between, where you're managing carefully this land in order to be productive, fertile, so but using feral animals or other cattle, and so can you tell us where we stand in this process between not managing and over managing, and making, working the land mainly perhaps for profit, and whereas you're working with the land to make it more productive?
I think we've got to distinguish enterprises. Nutrient extraction and distribution to feed people who can't feed themselves, which is what the core job of the primary of the pastoral area is market driven, and there are constraints. There are logistical restraints. There are financial constraints. There are government restraints. There's ecological constraints, and that's an industry and made up of various enterprises, from the breeding enterprise to the finishing off enterprise and whatever. However, what I'm involved is actually the real estate end of it. I'm actually reclaiming and rebuilding productivity. So the landscapes where I'm in don't support conventionally feasible pastoralism. It's that simple. It's just not there. However, to answer your question, overall we've got 180,000 acres or 77,500 hectares of land that we're responsible for, and a lot of diversity of land type. So before I go broke trying to manage the whole thing, I need to know what can I do where. So I've got my little model areas or proof of concept areas, if you will, where I try different things, and they're on a reasonably small area, and that's where I have intensive management, and that's where I'm getting data. I'm recording the changes in productivity, and what I'm seeing is not only changes in microclimate, I'm seeing changes in productivity, and I'm seeing that we can scale these things up. So, and that's the beauty about this whole regenerative thinking, is that we actually work in line with how nature works. When nature restores health, you've got a wound or something, or when something grows, whether it's a little shoot or an embryo, it begins at a cellular level, and it's a bottom-up process. And it's whether when we're trying to revitalize our soils, rebuild productivity into a landscape, we begin at that micro environment level, at a cellular level, bacteria and fungi, bottom of the trophic pyramid, and where the industry looks at return on investment, how they can get the most out of it to satisfy the market. What I'm saying is, here we have an opportunity. How can we increase the intake? Nature had this economy. It's faltering at the moment, especially with in the absence of Aboriginal burning, which disappeared out of this area a while. So really, we've got an ecology that's more or less in free fall. Can we stabilize it? Can we rebuild it? And can we enhance the self-healing? And what we're finding is, by strategically working on certain areas, we can actually begin rebuilding and get momentum. And I'm arguing quite vocally, in certainly these last 3 years, is if we learn to set the ecological sails, to trim the ecological sails appropriately, I suspect nature will fill them up so much faster than we could ever imagine. There's not a year's gone by where I sort of wonder, have I overdone it? Is this it? Where did I go wrong? And yet every time nature comes back and she'll slap you where you're wrong, but where she rewards you, it is quite phenomenal. So it's quite an exciting time, and also for the scientific enterprise of testing these ideas. So
also because you've been working on the land where you are for over 40 years, as we said, and so it's not a matter of changes year to year, like the interannual variability that you could observe. That is a natural event, natural phenomenon. You managed to demonstrate that this change is lasting over decades now. So it's not a chance, for example, because you came into a period when there was more rainfall, and that helped, or not, but because you went through several cycles, as I understand.
I think there's I provoked luck, and I got some luck. I mean, I came here when it literally was at its worst. There were a few very, very ordinary years in the late 80s, early 90s. So and the place was full of feral animals. So the country resembled a desert. However, and we did our learning and our trials into a run of improving wet seasons. So sure, we had a tailwind there in the first few years then, and we've never had a really bad season like we had in the 80s and 90s since in the area. However, I can say, or I can claim, or I am claiming, that in the areas where we're managing, we've got a managed reversal of the detrimental trends that I'm still observing in other areas, just beyond our boundaries. So regardless of season, in other areas, soil export is still escalating. The dehydration of the landscape is still happening. We're running out of springs and stuff. One particular instance was there's one permanently flowing creek stopped flowing for the first time probably in thousands of years in 2018, I think it was. The reason why I suspect it was thousands of years is because I witnessed how in 96 wetland got decimated, and then through fire and subsequent fires sort of took out the whole area. So the wetlands, there's a series of wetlands, in particular one that supplied perennial creek flow, they just disappeared. And now that area, that creek is like very many other creeks. They only flow when there's flood runoff, whereas really that's not the way it should work. And here where I'm working, we've actually reversed the process. We started off with a creek that ran dry every year, and now it's since after about 3 years of our activity, it's been flowing ever since, and it's our most reliable water source. So it's the fact that I'm defying trends that seem to be pretty common in the area through the management we do leads me to say, well, we need to sort of throw a bit of rigorous science at this and test some of these ideas that I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, and it's also talking with you on other occasions. I really appreciate your point of view in terms of where the science stands. That you obviously acknowledge that there's no solid science behind what you're doing, but you demonstrated something really solid, and now you're calling for scientists also to try and test whether your approach, obviously we cannot have all the data that we would have liked for the past 40 years, but the results are there. We can try through your recordings. You have a lot of photos as well. In fact, I invite listeners to go and visit the Kachana Station website, where you demonstrate clearly, the changes over the 40 years. And you've given so many lectures as well. You're also calling for land doctors. Maybe you also need some land nurses or even apprentices.
Yes. No, you don't have to do the full 5 years to become a land doctor. You can be the assistant, or you can be the nurse or the carer, depending which level you want to, or just the JP, general practitioner. But yes, what I'm calling for, as I'm saying, is a lot of my learning has been haphazard and trial and error, and I've made some huge mistakes. And it would be totally unfair to expect the average primary producer to just change his trajectory and embrace the full learning curve. And as I'm saying, is we've really got to analyze what's happened here. Best way, instead of rather analyzing, trying to put things together and listen to me, let's replicate what we've done. Use what we believe are the best ways, and then analyze that and test that, and encourage people to then take what they can, and then on their own places, at their own pace, see what they can do, because it's a one-size-fits-all thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. It's like I've got three children. Each one's different. If I'd sort of treated each one exactly the same, they still wouldn't be exactly the same. In fact, to be the people that they are now, we've had to sort of treat each one differently. And that's the same with anybody, any carer, or whether it's child carer, old age. Any carer, whether it's land care or whatever care, knows that care is something that's bottom-up, individual, and adaptive. And I think certainly within the regenerative side of things, that's what brings us all together, is a care for better outcomes in the future, and communicating what works and what doesn't work for each of us, and then learning as we go. So it's the whole thing's very highly dynamic and organic, but it's probably every bit as complex as a subject like climate. But but what we do is we try and be more aware of our impact, and when we get things wrong, well, we try and compensate and try and understand. So I think it's probably the scientific approach in anyway. I think it's you understand that you throw a few variables out there, and nature will select what's viable, and what looks viable gets tested, and you eliminate what doesn't work. So it's, in a way, we match that line of thinking.
Absolutely. I think the difficulty here is that, like you said, it's each one is on its own. So to have big enough statistics as is needed for scientific results, it's quite difficult. But we should also say, I'm not an expert here, but you mentioned to me previously there are some scholars that are looking into this matter. So there are some papers around. It's not that there's nothing. And so, without going into the details there, I think people can search and try to find what is done in terms of regenerative agriculture, farming, and so on, from a scientific point of view. So it's not just a practice. It's also being backed up by some science, but we need more. That's what my understanding, and I can relate also to obviously the not obviously, but I can relate to the fact that each individual is different, like with our 3 children, like you. So it's a challenge every day. Yeah. So it's but it's very rewarding in the end, like you say, with the land. So going back to the question about what I was mentioning before, the large scale intensive farming and where you started from. So you clearly demonstrated you can take unproductive soil to a level where you can make it productive. But then how can we manage that this is also economically sustainable and it's not scaled up in a way that is exploited, and it remains in balance with nature, provides ecosystem services, which include, like we said, the opportunity to act as a mitigation factor for greenhouse gas emissions?
It begins by putting value on things. And there's always, as accountants would know, there's always 2 sides to the ledger. And what is it costing us if we don't regenerate the productive capacity of these landscapes? I mean, just watch the news each summer and look at the costs involved in Northern Australia relating to wildfire, floods, and droughts. The 3 other they siblings: wildfire, floods, and droughts. They all have their root causes in poor soil health, and just being able to shave back some of those costs, and I suspect the insurance companies will be the people who'll be looking at this first, because how often do you want to pay for the same thing? Our neighbours they've had to rebuild their airstrip twice because of floods, and it's all got to do with what's happening upstream, and it's in a city environment, when your neighbour throws his trash across the fence over to your side, you'll say, "Hey, what's going on here?" And when this trashed country sheds all its water into a farming area, which can no longer produce, and there's what was sponges and rainforests and flowing creeks, it's become a hot desert just radiating heat or building up for the next bushfire. Well, then, there's a definite financial implication with that. So I'm saying is, you've got the producers who are feeding people who can't feed themselves, and there's a market there. That's great, and they are very good at that, and they're looking after that. But I'm saying is, there are these other parts of Australia where we could be actually looking at rebuilding. We could use the same tools that the industry's using, the same skill sets, and we could be rebuilding the water security. By water security, I mean having the right amount of water at the right time. So break the fire, drought, flood cycles. And that would have enormous economic benefits for the community, but it's beyond the scope of an individual person to deal with. And that's why the regenerative understanding needs to be at a community level. So when you make your food choices, not only do you need to be looking at, am I supporting a farmer who's growing good and healthy food, you could also be saying as well, what's the water story? So like a lot of the regeneration, the movement at the moment is being solved with a better food story, and that's great in Europe and in Americas and in Africa, where you've got a lot of people. But in places like Australia, well, we can improve our food story for the locals very quickly, but that doesn't stop the droughts, floods, and fires. So we've got to look at the water story, and that means we've actually got to come together as communities and embrace the local water story, and that's where I guess yes, in the terminology of the, what do you call them, the climunicators, I'm probably a microclimate alertist rather than a macroclimate alarmist. I'm saying as well, obviously there are things to be alarmed about. To me, it's a no-brainer. If experts begin agreeing on things, well, it's worth paying attention. And for me, that raises questions. And if it's an issue that's close to home, well, I ask you more questions. And what can I do? And so I'm looking at the microclimate stuff. And what I've realised is you can only do so much within property boundaries. If the rest of the country is turning into desert, we have a problem. And I had, once again, this is a sort of a deja vu thing for me. 50 years ago, Dad was winning the conservation trophies, and in the later farming areas further afield, it was places turning to a desert. I mean, if the trends had prevailed, well, you would have had an oasis in a desert, and with hundreds of thousands of people, or millions of people in starving in the desert. So, desertifying landscapes spell bad news. It's just a matter of time. In Australia, it just takes longer, and it manifests itself differently. But we have some great opportunities, but we have threats. So I'm absolutely, I think, to just laugh off climate debates as being just driven by agendas and bad science. I think that's very simplistic. I'm not saying that all scientific reports are good, and I'm not saying that there aren't any agendas. But there are enough serious people asking serious questions, and I think it's important that they get the support from the community, and that the community itself begins asking serious questions. And I see some great risks, and I see some wonderful opportunities.
And Chris, you basically demonstrated, like we said previously a few times, how you take this land from non-productive to productive. What would be the lessons learned, and also for lessons learned for other people? Other people who want to follow on your footstep and try also similar experiences in other parts of Australia or the world, indeed, knowing that, you're not acting alone, there is a community, but can you also provide some incentives and attract new people on the basis not only that you improve the land, but obviously you made I presume you made a little bit of living out of this activity, and so because it needs to be economically sustainable, otherwise why people they wouldn't do it to starve. No, so there is some behind that. It's not just for the good of the land, and so I think it's important also to look at that aspect in order to scale this activity up as much as possible.
Yeah, I think I touched on it earlier on. I think we really need to distinguish actions and enterprises, or actions at an enterprise level. So primary production, and in this case, in the mind of the public, and certainly the way the industry is going, it's nutrient extraction and supply. It's a production enterprise, and will stay that. And economic sustainability is either there or it's not. Regardless of cash flow. So you can have good cash flow while you're destroying the land. I mean, the global history shows that again and again. You can make money destroying the land. And while there is arguably politically correct extraction permitted, you cannot expect anybody to go out of their way and penalize themselves financially to try and address degradation that in some cases started thousands of years ago, and in some cases only a few generations ago. So the land doctoring needs to be looked at, or the regeneration, or the real estate thing is rebuilding the productive capacity back into landscapes. That needs to be looked at from a totally different lens, and it needs community sanction, it needs political support, And I can tell you, it's a very lonely road if you do it on your own. And I don't mind being on my own. That's why I'm where I am. But for most people, they won't do it. So they won't do it certainly for economic reasons. What we are seeing, though, in the regenerative movement is that a significant portion of the momentum of the regenerative movement is coming from the health area, where people have had health problems, where really you've got two options. It's either you die slowly or you do something radically different, or you try something radically different. And it's when people who eating good food as medicine and people providing good food as medicine, as word gets around of that happening, people are starting to vote with their feet. And that is, I think without that, regenerative movement wouldn't be where it is today. So we're looking at physical health just through better nutrition. We're looking at emotional health because the family farm is actually a safe place to be and isn't full of dangerous poisons and dangerous equipment. You're looking at community health because all of a sudden you're shortening you've got people knowing where their food is, getting acquainted with their food story and supporting the local farmer. And that allows further growth. So it's certainly that we now, thanks to the internet, like every year, there is at least 5 conferences and workshops that I've just got to say, great, I can't go, because you can't go to them all. There's so many good things happening. So it's happening, but it's happening from the bottom up. Now, to coordinate that and to scale it up and to make it efficient, that's where we need the top-down regulation or top-down encouragement. And so just like we at the grassroots need to go to courses and keep on learning because as new knowledge comes in, so I think it's very important that our legislators and regulators also come on board, join us in this learning process, and from their perspective have a look at the regulation. And because for regulation to be effective, or again, for regulation to actually be useful to the community, it has to be aligned with what the bottom-up aspirations are of the community or the regeneration. So there's new knowledge there that needs to be shared and acted on at the cutting edge, grassroots where we are, but also at the regulatory level. And that's what I'm strongly encouraging, is we need to come together as communities. And there's a great human resource management guru, Stephen Covey, has a great little point when he says, when relationships go sour, you can't talk yourself out of a bad relationship that you acted your way into. And if we apply that to the landscape level, is we can't legislate our way out of a predicament that we've managed our way into over generations. We're going to have to manage our way out. So legislation is going to have to be aligned with the sort of management that we need and not the sort of management that took us down there in the first place.
Beautiful. Oh, and to be a little bit more practical and also to wrap up the discussion, what would be your suggestions and recommendations for people who would like to contribute to this movement in order to make sure that the bottom-up practitioner actions are aligned with the top-down policy? And also maybe just to add that, how can we raise awareness more generally for people, particularly people living in urban areas, who see this as perhaps a very interesting story, but they feel very distant because it's very different to live in that context and rather than looking on the internet. So maybe also, if you are aware of opportunities for people to actually experience how it is to live for a few days in this context, to really appreciate what it's like to connect with nature, see how we can help with these activities and moving forward.
That was a very loaded question there, Alberto. let me answer it in this way. If you eat, you're involved in agriculture. So first step would be find out where your food comes from and who's producing it. And find out if it's been produced in a way that you would feel happy and proud to show your children how it's happening. So I'll say just find your closest regenerative farmer and then join him on the learning curve, because the learning curve is ongoing. But if you're in Australia, and some of the listeners here probably are, if you're in Australia, be aware that the best food story can still be eclipsed by a bad water story. So just as we as humans, whether we're a fit as a fiddle, Olympic athlete, or a concert pianist who just does different exercises, or a beast chain smoker, if we don't hydrate for 3 days, our performance is going to be exactly the same. And on a farming level production, whether you've got the high input agriculture with all the sprays and all the equipment, or you've got the regenerative farm, if the country around you is desertifying, you still have a problem. So we need to understand the water story. Water security is the bottom line. And the good thing about this is, first of all, no one can solve it on their own. It needs community, people getting together. And whether I'm a vegan or some Eskimo who only knows ice, it really doesn't matter. Hydration unites us all as humans and as living organisms. Let's get the water story right. Let's not focus on the differences. Let's focus on what we have in common. Starting with a good water story, progress to a good food story, but start on the water story, egg gets thrown in automatically. And all of a sudden we realize that we've got more in common than we actually think. We still have our differences, but we start generating atmosphere of abundance where people can live out the differences and not get in each other's way. The differences should be complementary and not polarizing. And so there's some great opportunities, but it really begins at the cellular level. Individuals and people speaking to each other across the table, families, communities. So we can we can look at the trends that are there. Which ones we're supporting trends. We need to know that. It's just becoming aware of what we're doing and say, well, hang on, this is what I want to support, and just start supporting a little bit more what you really want in the end for your children and grandchildren, and just support a little less what you think, well, that's a trend that shouldn't be able to continue forever, or can't continue forever without.
Fascinating. Yes, thank you, Chris. And I think we can wrap up here. And it's been very useful and insightful conversation. I learned a lot as every time we speak, whether in a podcast or not. So I'm really grateful for your wisdom and knowledge on this matter. It's really, really deep.
I'm just a messenger, Alberto. I'm just a messenger. The real teachers out there, Mother Nature, she selects for what's viable. There's a lot of, there's an infinite amount of ways of looking at things. There's only a small. There's a lot of things we can try and do, and there's only a small portion of those that are actually viable. And then of the viable ones, which are the ones we want to pursue as a community? And one community might want to do this, another one might want to do that. So yeah, we've got to, as communities, we've got to begin looking at viable options of how can we sort of manage our own microclimates, and then take things to the regional level. And you guys can ask us the right questions, keep us honest, and tell us the bigger picture.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, you're being modest because, there is a big difference between watching things and being observant. And I also live in the countryside, and we have a bit of land here, but I'm not anywhere near expert as you. And, I watch the plants, they're really beautiful, but if they are sick, I don't know much about what to do about them. So that's about being watchful, but not observe. I don't know enough about, and that's where the missing link is, and where you come in and provide that knowledge.
Yeah, none of us know enough. I mean, if I look at it, my in-laws are in the French part of Switzerland. My French is very rusty, and if I went there more often, my French would get better. And that's the thing, is when nature talks, we've just got to try and listen better, and just the attitude of bringing curiosity back into people's, we live in an age where we've got information overflow, sort of supplanting ancestral wisdom. We've got to try and bring curiosity back and ask the right questions, ask better questions, and listen to nature answering, because at the end of the day, nature bats last. She's the one that selects. And I think there's room for hope. There's a lot of room for hope, but we need to get our act together and start doing things and
Wonderful.
Communicating.
Exactly, and I actually invite also listeners to go and visit your website, which is Kachana-station.com, and Kachana is Kachana, and also there is a couple of interviews you've done for the ABC, the Australian National Television, which are really, really interesting, including a recent one was the Australian Story, I believe. And so, yeah, I invite everybody to go and look at those. They're really fascinating stories. All related to what you said today, but they go into more detail in some aspects. So thank you very much again, Chris. It's been really a pleasure to have you on our podcast, and we'll keep the conversation going, no doubt. Thanks again.
Thank you, Alberto.